Hey everybody, it's Allison Gill, host of the Daily Beans. Welcome to the Breakdown here on the Midas Touch Network. Thanks to Midas Touch for having me host this show here every Sunday at noon Pacific. Before I jump into what happened this week in my Epstein files training videos lawsuit, I just wanted to explain the stitches above my eye. I did not get into a street fight. I know everyone is saying that I was in a bar brawl, but no, in fact, I just went to the doctor to have something removed and tested. So everybody, just want to give you your PSA. Please wear sunscreen everywhere you go. First of all, as you know, I've sued the Department of Justice to get copies of the training videos that both the FBI and the Department of Justice used to train their staff on how to redact the Epstein files, whose names to redact from the Epstein files. Now, I have yet another blockbuster admission from the Department of Justice about it for you today, and from the FBI. As you know, a couple of weeks ago, they admitted that the training videos exist. And that was half of my lawsuit, was to just find out if there were training videos from over a year ago. And they admitted that there were, and now they've taken it a step further, and I'll share with you today what they're admitting. They just admitted not only do the training videos exist, but they have 1 hour, 14 minutes, and 13 seconds of training videos from last year. This is from last year. This is from March 14th through the end of March, that marathon review conducted by the Department of Justice when they locked 1,000 FBI employees in the building from Information Management Division, put them on 24 and 48-hour shifts to redact the Epstein files. And one of the instructions they were given was to find Trump's name, mark Trump's name for redaction, and log Trump's name into an Excel spreadsheet from over 300,000 pages of Epstein files. Purportedly, from what we understand now, after subsequent reporting, these were the files that came from the Southern District of New York in an open and ongoing investigation that was being conducted by Merrick Garland's Department of Justice, that Trump came in and shut down on January 20th, 2025. He subsequently fired the prosecutors from Southern District of New York that were working on that open investigation into Epstein co-conspirators. They had had about 50 witnesses that they were working with. It was a massive case. And they took all of those files, Trump did, and sent them to the Department of Justice. So purportedly, these were the files that those 1,000 to 1,500 FBI analysts were locked in the building and forced to look through and log Trump's name, among other things. At first, they weren't even supposed to redact the victims' names, according to my sources. And that's when the FBI and the analysts pushed back and said that should be the most important thing. But here we are. And they have these training videos. They've admitted having these training videos. And they've admitted that it's about an hour's worth, which seems a little low to us. But they're refusing to hand these training videos over. So I'll go over how we got here and what's next for us on today's episode of The Breakdown. All right, let me give you a little backstory here. I know a lot of you have heard some of this before, but back in July of last year, just after Kash Patel and Pam Bondi issued their memo saying there's nothing to see here, we're not investigating anymore, there's no client list, and we're closing everything. I believe it was July 6th. They did it over the July 4th weekend in the middle of the night, so as not to draw attention to it. And we're just closing the matter. Oh, and by the way, there was no blackmail. No one blackmailed anyone. And this was also the time period when Todd Blanche met with Ghislaine Maxwell, right before she was moved to a minimum security facility. And right around that time, Senator Dick Durbin wrote a letter to the Justice Department that reads in part, quote, "According to information my office received, You then pressured the FBI to put approximately 1,000 personnel in its Information Management Division, including the Record Information Dissemination section, which handles all requests submitted by the public under the Freedom of Information Act and the Privacy Act, on 24-hour shifts to review approximately 100,000 Epstein-related records in order to produce more documents that could be released on an arbitrarily short deadline. This effort, which reportedly took place from March 14th through the end of March, was haphazardly supplemented by hundreds of FBI New York field office personnel, many of whom lacked the expertise to identify statutorily protected information regarding child victims and child witnesses, or properly handle FOIA requests. My office was told that these personnel were instructed to flag any records in which President Trump was mentioned. So everyone, that letter was dated July 18th of last year. The next day, I put a call out on social media. Attention, if you're one of the 1,000 FBI agents who reviewed the Epstein files, feel free to reach out to me via Signal in my bio. I'll keep you anonymous, as I have the thousands of current and former federal workers who have sent me tips. Please share this widely. Within 24 hours, I received multiple messages from people that I was able to confirm worked on the review of the Epstein files. And they confirmed that there were approximately 1,000 analysts on 24, sometimes 48-hour shifts to review the files between March 14th and March 31st. They also verified that Trump was in the documents and that they were told to mark and log every mention of Donald Trump. They even explained the process to me in detail, including logging mentions of Trump on a local spreadsheet on their computers, and then at the end of the day or the end of their 24-hour shift, to drop their work into a central master Excel file of Trump mentions in the Epstein files. And it says, Dick Durbin's letter says 100,000 pages. I asked about that as well. And it's actually 100,000 documents, about 300,000 pages. So it's an average of 3 pages per document. That's where that number discrepancy comes into play. Also, during those interviews, we all learned something new, something we hadn't known before. It hadn't been reported publicly. It hadn't been FOIA'd. It wasn't in Dick Durbin's letter. It wasn't in whistleblower accounts to Congress about that review. We learned that there were training videos. Because if you're going to have a local spreadsheet and take it to a master spreadsheet, and if you're going to redact Trump's name, and if you're going to be told to redact lewd and lascivious acts, or you're going to be told to redact victims' names, all of that, you have to be trained on that. Because as it said in Dick Durbin's letter that I had just put up on the screen, that they had to bring in people from the New York field office that weren't trained in how to redact for Privacy Act and FOIA considerations. So they had training videos because I had asked my sources. I was like, well, how did you know? Who told you to do this? Did they send you an email? Because you've just described a very detailed process to me about local Excel spreadsheets and master Excel spreadsheets on a SharePoint drive that, by the way, had open permission to anyone who wanted to view it. I was like, that's a pretty detailed step-by-step thing. I've worked for the government. I think there should be a 20-slide PowerPoint deck that should go along with this. And they said yes. And there were training videos embedded in those PowerPoint decks, instructing the analysts on how to redact the Epstein files. Now, over the next few days, after I published that story, several other analysts reached out to me from multiple agencies, confirming what I had written and what my sources had initially told me about the existence of the training videos. And I got more information on them, where I could find them. They weren't just in the unclassified SharePoint. They were also on something called BuTube, which is the FBI's YouTube. Get it? Bureau, BuTube. And that's classified side. That's on what they call the high side. But anyway, that day, my lawyer, Kel McClanahan at National Security Counselors, filed a Freedom of Information Act request on behalf of my independent media company for, quote, all videos stored on SharePoint on the unclassified side, or SharePoint or BuTube on the classified side, which were created or used to train FBI personnel in how to review records about Jeffrey Epstein. Now, the FBI had 10 days to respond to my request for expedited consideration, and because they didn't, we sued in federal court. That was last August. That was a year ago, my friends. Then 10 months later, we finally got that letter from the FBI pursuant to our FOIA request, admitting they do indeed have training videos from that time, from last year. And here's the letter. It says, this is in response to your Freedom of Information Act request to the FBI. Please see the paragraphs below for the relevant information specific to your request, and see the enclosed FBI FOIPA addendum for standard responses applicable to all requests. The FBI completed its search for records subject to the FOIA that are responsive to your request. Media consisting of videos has been reviewed under FOIPA Title V, United States Code, Section 552A. And this material is being withheld in its entirety by the FBI pursuant to these FOIA exemptions here, B5, B6, B7C, and B7E. The exemptions used are explained on the enclosed explanation of exemptions. And I had my lawyer, Kel, on this show a couple weeks ago when we got that letter, and we explained all those. So if you wanted to know more about those FOIA exemptions, all you ever wanted to know about FOIA exemptions and more, you can watch that previous episode. It's over at MuellerSheWrote.com. That's where I keep them. So they admit they have the training videos, but they're not going to give them to me under Freedom of Information Act exemptions. Shortly after that, this whole new law was passed that says you have to release those things, and they didn't. So they're withholding them under Freedom of Information Act exemptions, but they haven't explained how they're withholding them under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. And that's interesting because, as you know, in our friend Katie Fang's lawsuit, some of my colleague here on the Midas Touch, in her lawsuit to get the Epstein files, the Justice Department released training materials on how to redact the Epstein files, namely this January 4th, 2026 memo, training attorneys on how to review and redact the Epstein files. It says, this memorandum memorializes the protocol for conducting a responsiveness review of the Jeffrey Epstein files and to assist in providing guidance on redactions for victim identifying information and other protected categories of information. Please review the entire protocol before beginning your review. Well, that's great. You're into releasing training materials. Why are they exempt from being handed over in a Freedom of Information Act request? Is it because these new training materials don't mention find, flag, and record Donald Trump's name in a master spreadsheet? Is it because by the time you got to the review here, this protocol for the Epstein files, is it because you already had the FBI go through and take Trump's name out and anybody else who you didn't want to embarrass? Because you'll recall that when the Department of Justice put 4 terminals up for members of Congress to go and look at the Epstein files, just to click on the redactions to pull the redaction bars back, some you couldn't pull back. That's because they were scanned in, redacted by the FBI a year ago. So I don't give a shit what your redaction memo training was the second time around. after the release of the files, after they've already been redacted. I'm interested in what you told people to redact a year ago, a year and a half ago now, March in 2025. I want to know what you told them. Is that why you're not releasing those training videos and training materials, but you're releasing this document from January 4th, the one I just put up? The review protocol? It was sent out in January of this year, after the Epstein files were supposed to be released. I'm sorry. I want the ones from back then, when multiple people who reviewed the files confirmed they were told to redact Donald Trump's name, among other things. Sure would love to have that master Excel spreadsheet, too. I don't want, Todd Blanche, I don't want your after-the-fact explanation. But that brings us to this week. Okay. In preparation for my joint status report, the DOJ admitted additional details about the training videos they're withholding, saying they amount to multiple videos totaling 1 hour, 13 minutes and 14 seconds. They also informed us that they'll be asking for an additional 90 days to write their declaration describing the videos to the judge and why they're withholding them. 90 more days, because they're super busy. They say, we're so busy because so many people are suing us right now. Now, we don't agree with that timeline. We don't agree to 90 days. Here are some highlights from our joint filing. First, we bring up the fact that we sent an email to the Department of Justice back in December, 8 months ago, after some new information came out in a Freedom of Information Act request filed by the FOIA guru, the FOIA whisperer, Jason Leopold at Bloomberg. Remember those emails that showed that there were PowerPoint decks and training materials back in last March, but they won't release those? They release the emails showing the attachments, but they won't release the actual attachments. Well, so we sent an email to the FBI saying, hey, in light of this new information that you just gave to Jason Leopold, we want to clarify what we're asking for. So initially we asked for all videos stored on SharePoint on the unclassified side or BuTube on the classified side, as I said, which were created or used to train FBI personnel on how to review records about Jeffrey Epstein. And back in December, after Leopold was able to obtain some more information about the first redaction party, we wrote this to the Department of Justice. In light of this article, and then we link the article there from Jason Leopold, we just want to clarify that any and all training videos, even those embedded in PowerPoint decks, are responsive to this request, and that they may be identified as being part of the Epstein Transparency Project or the Special Redaction Project. And this includes both the original training videos and the updated training materials and workflow guidance that's mentioned in the March 22nd email released to Jason Leopold. Furthermore, the scope of the request should incorporate a liberal reading of, quote, how to review records. This is not limited to videos about redactions and withholdings. How to gain access to the records, how to mark them, how to prioritize them, how to manage the workflow, and the like are all covered by, quote, how to review records. Because some of these records may not be easily searchable, we recommend contacting the FBI officials involved in sending and receiving the emails released to Jason Leopold and asking them to identify records responsive to this request. That was an email that we sent based on new information. The next day, the Justice Department responded to my lawyer saying, we're going to pass that along. That was December of last year. Received. We're passing it along. No objections. Nothing like that. That was in December. Then 3 days ago, the DOJ told us that the videos are an hour, 13 minutes, and 14 seconds. And we wrote back and said, okay, but what about the rest of the materials we told you about last December in that email that you passed along? Guess what? They've decided all of a sudden, 8 months later, that they object to that. They said after the plaintiff's counsel asked the FBI's counsel to explain this discrepancy, drawing his attention to the email thread, and the FBI's counsel replied, the FBI determined that plaintiff's December 2025 email was improperly attempting to expand the scope of its original FOIA request in the course of litigation, and thus did not consider it in conducting our search for records responsive to plaintiff's original request. That's interesting. You didn't say that in December. You said, gotcha, we'll pass it along. Didn't hear a peep till 3 days ago, while working on our joint status update for the court, which we handed in. By the way, this document that I'm showing you portions of was handed in on Friday, August 21st, just a couple days ago. So like I said, we sent that email in December, and you're just now telling us that you think we're improperly expanding the scope. So on Friday, we said this. Contrary to the interpretation cited by the FBI below, the case law prohibiting modification of a FOIA request during litigation is limited to cases in which the agency had already performed a search. But when they sent that email back in December, it's likely they did not perform the search, or we would have gotten our response more than 8 months later. Not more than 8 months later, I should say. We've gotten our response a lot sooner. So did they just ignore us? Performed the search this last week and then claim, oh, but we already performed the search? We'd like to know when the search was performed, because, again, you can only not expand the scope after the search has been conducted. And you had no problem. You didn't say anything about, and we think you're wrongfully expanding the scope last December. So they ignored it and hid it from us for 8 months. So to that we say this, quote, in light of the fact that the FBI waited 8 months and given its way, would have waited 3 more, because they're asking for a 90-day extension, to even suggest that it was refusing to honor the plaintiff's instructions, the court should require it to file its motion for summary judgment within 30 days, not 90, so that the matter can be quickly resolved and the agency can be required to perform a new search as soon as possible, before the responsive records are destroyed as temporary files. So basically, fine, if you're going to actually require a new search, the one we asked for back in December that you didn't object to until a couple days ago, then be quick about filing your motion for summary judgment. You don't get 90 days. We need to get on with it, because check this out. Like, they're asking for another 90 days. Here, they say, operationally, the FBI has one of the largest and most complex FOIA and Privacy Act programs in the federal government, reviewing about 1.3 million pages annually for dissemination to the public. Despite these best efforts, the FBI's FOIPA program cannot keep pace with the increasing public demand. We have a blah, blah, blah % increase in Freedom of Information Act requests since Biden, and we have fewer employees, and that makes it really hard to respond to all of it. And this isn't sustainable for us. We've lost 10% of our staff. They went on for a whole page about this. We've lost 10% of our staff. Sure, that's our fault because we took a Doge sledgehammer to the agency and then assigned a third of who was left to work for ICE. But please, can we have 90 more days to do the work we're supposed to do that we can't do because of cuts we made? To which we say, it should not take the agency 3 months to draft a declaration defending a categorical, non-particularized withholding of 75 minutes of video footage, especially when the FBI has already been required to disclose the records by statute. See Epstein Files Transparency Act, Section 2A8, which says all unclassified records documents, communications, and investigative materials in the possession of the Department of Justice, including the Federal Bureau of Investigation and United States Attorney's offices that relate to all communications, memoranda, directives, logs, or metadata concerning the destruction, deletion, alteration, misplacement, or concealment of documents, recordings, or electronic data related to Epstein, his associates, his detention and death, or any investigative files. Those 300,000 pages were investigative files from the Southern District of New York. Yeah, like I said, we filed our FOIA request for these training videos before the Epstein Files Transparency Act was a gleam in the eye of Ro Khanna and Tom Massey. But in the middle of my FOIA litigation, here comes this law that says you actually have to release by law these training videos. And still they're withholding them under FOIA exemptions. And look, the FBI cannot be allowed to delay even defending its withholding of these records for 3 more months solely due to the routine and predictable litigation pressures faced by any large agency's FOIA office. None of the increase described in the FBI's position statement was unexpected, and the FBI has consistently failed to increase the size of its FOIA office for numerous years to account for the steady increase in FOIA requests and litigation. So you're telling us the FBI won't even identify the records it was required to release under the Epstein Files Transparency Act until more than a year after the law was passed? You want to object to the release of these materials in December of 2026? The Epstein Files Transparency Act was passed in November of 2025. So you ignore our December email, the month the Epstein files were due, to release these training materials. And when we say training materials, we don't just mean these videos. So it's really interesting that you responded admitting that you had the videos, but that there was nothing else. That's why we wrote that email in December, which you said, alrighty dighty, pass it along, I'm passing it along. Then all of a sudden, you call it an unreasonable modification. 8 months later, and now you need more time, pushing it to a year past the deadline for releasing them under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So we're not asking them to release these videos right now in the PowerPoint decks immediately. We're not even asking them to respond to our demand to do so. All we're asking for is the court should accordingly order the FBI to file a motion for summary judgment within 30 days of this date, the date of the court's order. We haven't even gotten to the merits, cuz big picture, we asked for the redaction training materials last August. Then the Epstein Files Transparency Act was signed. You were actually supposed to hand over these training videos by law then, and you haven't. Then you admitted you had the training videos, ignoring our email about the rest of the training materials. And now you're saying, oh, well, you expanded your request before we even started searching 8 months ago, and we're just telling you now that we're not handing any of it over, and we're certainly not acknowledging your email, and we should get 90 more days because we couldn't see a backlog coming when we fired everyone. That's what this government does. They obfuscate and delay in order to protect these bad people. They delay and they try to bury you with paperwork, hoping that I'll give up. But I'm not giving up. I didn't give up when I had to face the courts and the cops to flee domestic violence. I didn't give up when I was wrongfully terminated from the Department of Veterans Affairs by Donald Trump in 2019. And I'm not rolling over now. I want the training materials from March 2025. I want to know what you told FBI agents to redact from the Epstein files. I know what you told them because they told me, but I want to see it. Multiple sources confirmed it to me. Subsequent FOIA releases have confirmed it. You've admitted the training materials exist. And They were supposed to be released under the Epstein Files Transparency Act. So if you think I'm going to stop asking, you have woefully underestimated me. Todd Blanche. But I love it when people underestimate me, because they never see me coming. And then they never knew what hit them. Everybody, thanks so much for watching. I'm Allison Gill. I'll see you next week on The Breakdown.
Breaking news right now, my brothers and I wrote a book. It's called WTF America. And well, doesn't that just say it all? It comes out officially this October, but you can pre-order your copy today. Just scan the QR code or click the link in the description below.